meeting to order for the Sustainability and Community Enhancement Ad Hoc Committee. Today, Wednesday, October 3rd. Can I have a roll call, please?
Certainly. Co-Chair Purrier is here, Co-Chair Renner is absent, Member Bishop is absent, Member Johnson,
Here.
Member Twitchell,
Here.
Member Patterson,
Here.
and Member Sorensen is absent. You have a quorum.
Oh, perfect. Okay, so if I have a quorum, I get to, do I get to do the minutes, approval of the minutes?
We do not have minutes for you to approve this time.
Okay, sorry. All right, then are there any people in the audience that would like to present? Do they have any comment? Anybody that isn't related to this? No, hearing none, seeing none, moving on. Okay, we are going to jump into the stakeholder workshops for the corridor beautification study. And Jody, I turn it over to you.
Great, wonderful. Thank you all. So thank you for making the time to be with us again this evening, and I appreciate the sort of roundtable discussion. The purpose of tonight is for us to follow up on what we spoke about last time, which was earlier in the summer, for the landscape identity and Route 176 corridor. What we're going to do tonight is kind of go through a recap of what we discussed the last time, and then present to you some of the concepts that Cliff and our firm have come up with together. And really, tonight is about a workshop. It's really about getting your input on these materials so that we can then tweak them and then bring back to you all a final report, which would be presented at a final meeting before the end of this year. But before I get too far along, maybe we could just kind of do a real quick introduction, since I know that there are people beyond just the Sustainability Committee. So again, I'm Jody Mariano, landscape architect with Tesca Associates.
I'm Marianne Hans, Lake Bluff resident, 600 Hour Drive, Lake Bluff.
Jake Turlap, Public Works Superintendent.
Bob Hurdle, Village Arborist.
Larry McConnor, Lake Bluff Open Lanes.
Bill Nordine, Lake Bluff Open Lines.
Nan Patterson, Sustainability Committee.
Emma Johnson, Sustainability Committee.
Glenn Cole, Village of Lake Bluff.
Sophie Twitchell, Committee.
Maureen Purrier, Committee.
Rob Douglas, Park Board member.
Cliff Miller, Landscape Architect.
Johnny, you want to introduce yourself?
John Scopoletti, Administrative Intern for the Village of Lake Bluff.
Okay, super. Thank you all. So we're also sending out a sign-in sheet, so it's making its way around. And I apologize that the slides are behind you, so I'm going to ask you guys to spin around. You could sit here if you'd rather.
Yeah, I'll just move around.
Sure,
That'd be easier, then I'm not everybody's way.
Okay, so again, we're gonna, kind of go through a little bit about what we heard last time. You might recall we have lots of stakeholders on this corridor. So last time we had IDOT and Lake County DOT also represented, because a lot of this roadway is within the public right-of-way. So we've been in touch with them since that meeting, and we've been able to incorporate their comments. So we'll go through those. And then we're going to get right into the landscape concepts. We've got materials we're going to present on the slides, and we've also got materials sitting right behind Glenn conveniently. So when we get to the end of the presentation, what we hope to do is, just have a discussion, get some input, and make marks on the maps so that we can, devise a plan to move forward. What we heard the last time was a desire to have a landscape playbook, something that just gives guidance moving forward, so that as stakeholders plan to do certain projects along the corridor, there's at least a framework or a template that everybody can kind of work within. And we'll talk about next steps and let you get back to a beautiful summer evening. It feels like summer. So just as a reminder, the goals and the outcomes of this assignment is to document the identity and character village-wide, but then really to take a step a little bit closer and focus on Route 176 as kind of a pilot project for this effort. This was the map that we all reviewed together the last time, and we can spend more time looking at it. But what we had done is a way to generate kind of our positioning for this 176 corridor is to look at what are the natural landscape patterns that are village-wide. And so you see the green wetland is kind of, following the Skokie River. There's also other elements along the roadways that represent forest growth, scrub woodland. Savanna is in orange. There are these really lovely kind of trees and just manicured lawn that follow parts of Sheridan Road, for instance. So these are the things that we wanted to at least document at a really high level, because what that does is it informs what we can do from a landscape design standpoint at 176. Let's jump in whenever you want to.
Doing a good job.
And this is just for background if we needed it, but we did take in the city's GIS data so that we have a good sense as to the ownership along the corridors. And just as a reminder, we're really just focused on the roadways. We're focused on 176, Sheridan, Green Bay Road, and there's a whole host of different landowners, but we were able to work with Lake County DOT and IDOT to kind of confirm these things and verify them. So this is a zoomed in version looking at Route 176. So here we are, Skokie River is here. The railroad is here. There is that village entry sign at this location. Green Bay Road is in this area. Sorry, I was in Bob's. So this is a zoomed in version of the types of landscape patterns that we documented on that village-wide graphic, but just to kind of clue you in, we've got, this is the savanna patterning that's up here. There's a little trace of wetland. We have scrub woodland down here by Jawa. And then we've got, wetland kind of, snaking its way through here. The reason to do all this is to have a good idea as to what lies beyond the roadway, so that we know what to remove, what to add to, and maybe promote some expansive views into the spaces beyond the roadway. This is just property ownership for reference, but the blue in this area is Village of Lake Bluff. The right-of-way, as you can see, is really varied. So, the black line represents the center line, but the public right-of-way is anywhere from 66 feet to 70 feet. In some spots it gets as narrow as 50. It's pretty wide on the south side of the road, so there is not a consistent right-of-way. But IDOT controls the areas in yellow to the south, and it's here for our reference.
Could you go back for a
Yeah,
second?
of course.
What's the private trust?
I think that's that one house.
That's
on
Mrs.
Front
Amos'
Yard.
house.
So, but
That's
on
Margaret
the
Amos' house.
it's in a trust, so it's double marked, right?
So the
Private-
purple's-
oh, private, purple
Yeah,
is
it's-
theirs house, and then private residential is in between.
So according to the GIS, the private trust is this purple sliver in here. So it's listed as this dotted
Yeah.
yellow market. But that said, there's still right of way between the edge of road and that property line.
Okay.
Just a couple of notes, recap from what we heard. So we had representatives from the DOTs here last time. IDOT shared some information about a pump station project that has a November 2019 letting. And that's northwest of the intersection of 176 and the railroad tracks. There is a long-range intersection improvement at 41-176, but there is no funding for that, we've been told. So it's not something in the near term, but good to think about in the long range. And we heard a lot about their native planting initiatives, that they are interested in pollinator type plantings along roadway landscapes. Lake County DOT, they shared that they have a bike path signage and branding RFP out, or they probably had it out, and now it's probably been secured. So they're probably working on that effort. And that they prefer, from a maintenance standpoint, that a 2-foot offset along the edge of the bike path is preferred, just to keep things safe and in open views. Other stakeholders that we heard from, a lot of folks that are in the room tonight, so let me know if you have anything to add or edit, but Algola has this, fabulous volunteer base, and they're making real substantial efforts, with the open spaces. They've been removing a lot of buckthorns and installing prairie and wetland and managing those things. They do lots of great educational programming and are, promoting best practices for sustainability. The Lake Bluff Garden Club also has open space and beautification projects. They too shared an interest in promoting sustainable practices. Is anybody from the garden club here?
Yes, I am, and what I would add to that
Yeah.
is that the garden club's been working with Canucken and with the village on beautification of Washington Park.
Washington Park, thank you, that's great. And that's what you can.
And Glenn, correct me if I'm wrong, but we've, Canucken's requested permits to start the work.
Yeah. So there's, we've looked at it as sort of a two-phase project. The first being some of these plantings during the fall planting season. I think that's, Jake, I don't know if we've got any last water issue hanging out there, but I think those are, I don't know if those are issued or those are in the process of being issued, but they're going. And then there's sort of the second phase, which is some of the hardscape improvements. We talked about that water fountain issue, benches, tables, ADA access, some of these other issues that were left out there at the committee's last meeting.
That's great. Continuing on to the Sustainability Committee, of course, looking at village-wide policies and programs, and there is this interest in this playbook that we're here to talk about tonight that supports policy. And then from the public works standpoint, a lot of similarities to what we heard from IDOT and Lake County DOT, but maintenance is key. These things, not only have to look nice, but they have to be maintainable. So salt and drought tolerance is important, keeping the landscape clear next to pathways. So I think a lot of these things are really very similar across the board. Of course, different stakeholders have different interests, but I think there's a lot of similarities in the desire for sustainability, durable plantings, materials that look nice and promote village identity. Any other items that maybe I haven't mentioned? So, along those lines, some strategies that we heard that were sort of consistent along the board was this overall desire to, yes, please, let's remove all that buckthorn and install things that are durable and keep those views or maintain those views open, which means remove some of the non-natives in buckthorn. At the end of the meeting last time, we heard that there was an interest in addressing these things in the playbook. So it was gateway entry signage landscapes, intersection treatments, best practices to address stormwater, best practices for privacy screening. So what are the alternatives to buckthorn, for instance? And we've got some ideas about landscape plant lists for all these things, and the same thing with pollinator species. So again, we're here kind of focused on Route 176. This is the golf course property, Park District, Railroad, and here's Rockland Road.
Could I just clarify?
Yeah, please.
Golf course and Park District are one and the same?
Yes, thank you. That's a good point. But Park District building is what I should have said.
Yeah, okay.
I appreciate that. So I'm going to go through a couple of concepts, and the one that's probably the largest concept is this one that's also here sitting behind Glenn, but this is a concept for the Route 176 corridor, for the entire corridor. And if you look at the bottom, you'll see that there's a legend that keys into the different colors and landscape types, but this really is generated based on that overall village-wide landscape patterning that we see. So the brown scrub woodland exists today, the savanna exists, the wetlands exist, the ponds and the rivers all exist. So what we're trying to do is work with what is behind the right-of-way line. The right-of-way line is shown in red, and what we have depicted here on the concept is that where we have, for instance, the corridor here, existing trees are noted in this light green color. What we're trying to do is really promote views. So as you're coming through across Rockland Road, we're opening up all of this buckthorn that's in here, for instance. And we know that Algola has already started removals in that area, but we're saying, yes, let's continue to do that and get these fabulous views across the ponds, across the golf course, into those spaces. Same thing on the south side where we can open up views across the Ponte Jawa. Yeah.
How are we defining the right-of-way? How many feet from the center line?
So the right-of-way varies, unfortunately. It's not consistent, not like every other place. We know what it is based on those other maps, but it really is in the range of it's exactly 66 feet here. And then as it continues to the east, it shrinks up near the where the grade changes around here to like 55. It opens up again to 71 where the
And are we going to honor that so that we don't step on IDOT's toes? Is that the idea? Or
Work with.
I think so. I think, if we were to just limit ourselves to like 10 feet of space, we're not going to do much, and I think there's a benefit here that this is all controlled. Most of it, at least, is controlled by the village. So there's a great opportunity to really let the landscape lead out beyond just the right-of-way. But the idea, again, is to promote open views and then to allow these sort of, drifts of low native plantings in yellow, where it's drier, and drifts of wet-tolerant plantings in this light green to kind of define an edge. And we've got some ideas that I'll show you as to what those things can look like. Some other features of the plan is that there are some areas where we don't want to promote views. There's places where we want to screen views. So no offense to the Park District, but we did want to screen some views to the taller building here. So these are opportunities for some copses of native shrubs. Same thing to the Mariani landscape yard here. Places to kind of divert your view so you're not looking into trucks.
So on the north side, there's a whole lot that is going to be dedicated to lawn. Why would that be?
And then with this area here?
Yeah, why wouldn't you have that continue whatever the light orange is? Because it's massively different in terms of flood control and maintenance and stuff.
Sure.
do you see
I didn't understand.
I think the question was, so where this dashed line represents the removal of buckthorn replacing with lawn.
Why
Why
replace
lawn?
with lawn instead of continue the native grasses up to the edge?
Well, one of the ideas behind this is, when you're doing a corridor approach like this, and you have this sense of scale, the idea is interconnect these, so things weave in and out. There's a big lawn in this area. The golf course is 100-something acres of it. And so the idea is that it kind of bleeds out of there and blends and goes around these pockets and islands and helps direct views and create a setting. Ease of maintenance for some, ease of use for some of the people. But it's a technique.
What does that mean, ease of use for some of the people? What do you mean ease of use for some of the people?
I meant to say ease of maintenance for a lot of people. For a lot of groups and organizations, it's a lot easier to mow it than it is to do a lot of, weed in or control stuff like that. But reality of it is, these are framing those windows. It increases the power of the elements that are left. So the idea is not to just put it in a wall of grass so you can't see the first 100 feet of the golf course or those ponds and that kind of stuff, but to have areas and avenues where we carry the lawns that are on the grass. Same thing on Jawa when we come through over there. But the only way for this to really work well is if this is, we're looking at the IDOT corridor and the county line, but really it needs Mariani, it needs the Park District, it needs, Jawa and other people involved in it. But the idea of islands is to allow for a sort of, because the sides of the road, those areas will be grass, sides of the path have to be grass. So rather than just have these linear strips, have these, sort of organic shapes that are formed. The actual size of those, keep in mind, this is just generic. The concept of creating these islands and running sight lines and lawn to direct it is a unifier to the surrounding area.
Yeah.
There's a lot more lawn there than most anything else, but we're proposing not necessarily that size, but the concept of it.
Okay, I like the concept. It seems like a ton of it goes to grass. So,
Yeah.
and the golf course is a lot of grass.
Well, I think that's the other thing is that, because there's grass beyond it, we want to try and, like Cliff said, promote those views so sort of blend in. And we'll show you some images in a bit that, shows you what those look like. Because sometimes if it's too much prairie, then there's nothing to kind of counter it.
Well, I get the idea of a transition. I understand that. Would it be native grasses, or are we talking about, Kentucky bluegrass or something?
Well, that depends. That's not something that, we've gotten into yet. You could have the low turf, the fescues, that kind of stuff. There's very few native grasses that'll stay on those soils, short. What type of grass depends on how strong we want those connections.
I haven't thought a lot about it, but I sort of like the idea, as long as it would be a true native of some sort, or a series of natives to make the transition, as long as it's native plantings, put it that way.
Meaning you'd like the low grass, the lawn to be.
Yeah, yes, instead of it being a lawn as we interpret it in our front yards and things,
Sure.
a lawn that would be native, and I
understand what you're saying.
I cut buckthorn, I don't really know the rest of this, but that's the way I would see it.
I think it absolutely could be that way.
Can I just add something? I understand the concept here. Think of it in layers. You have the ground plane, which is this broad definition of a lawn, which we can certainly further define. Then you've got sort of a mid-range, I guess it would be more of a prairie element.
Yeah.
And then you have the canopy over the trees. So you have 3 layers that you'll be in elevation that we'll be kind of developing here, which that intrigues me. And I see what you're doing as far as weaving this together. But I guess, I know this is a concept at this point, but are we going to actually really get more definitive about defining view corridors through here? Because I can see these little windows, but I'm thinking long views.
Well, so the idea is for us to take as much view as we can. We would even going like over back over to Chala. A lot of you might remember when that was burned and kept very open, and you could see the whole thing. That was pre-9/11, and the fence went up and some of the management changed. It just went, now we can't see it. That's an asset we want, so we want to get in there and take care of that. But the ground plane is, you were talking about, Rob, you not only have ground, you have the herbaceous, the shrub, the understory, the canopy. There's literally 5 layers that we can deal with. And using those layers, because those are primarily heights, in a variety of ways gives us just a more interesting approach and something that's so the grass, whether it's native, non-native, or just, whatever it ends up, the idea is changing significantly the ground plane enough to create this continuum that wraps everything, runs the sides of the streets, runs the sides of the paths, runs in through and connects to the course. The actual plant itself will have to work on it, and the shape of that. But the view corridors will directly determine where these openings are, and some of the existing conditions will. For instance, when we did Sunrise Park, a lot of those vistas were based on where the lower quality woodlands were, or where there was more dead trees, or nowadays it's where the ash are. But these windows, a lot of them, and certainly down at Forest Park in Lake Forest as well, where hundreds of trees were removed, they were based not just on the view shed, but on the quality of the system that you're viewing through. So sometimes we may have to miss the best view or a good view, because we happen to be in a really good stand of oak or something like that. But we can work with all of that, and we can adjust ground planes to get a different height.
And maybe just simply taking out the word lawn and replacing it with grasses would be helpful.
Yeah.
What did you call it, Rob? The ground plane?
Well,
I like that.
it's something that doesn't go any higher than your knee, maybe.
Well, I think even the
Or
yellow
from a golfer's
bluffs-
perspective, long, rough.
I think even the yellow bluffs would not be taller than 3 feet. Remember, we're still against a roadway, so we want things to still stay relatively low, because when you're in a regular car, your eyeballs are like 3.5 feet, so you want to still be able to kind of see across. The one other element to point out here is that we have this really wonderful 3-rail split rail fence at Green Bay Road and in Route 176, and we saw this as an opportunity to introduce or continue it as a thematic element along the corridor. And I know that Public Works does not love
Terrible
idea,
idea.
but
It really is. And I can tell you why. I mean, we'll spend over 300 hours a month in the summer cutting grass. And if you're gonna add 2 more miles of fence for us to weed along and clean up along, and keep in mind that well, our weed eaters are not your homeowners' weed eaters, right? I mean, they're pretty powerful, and I usually have college age kids using them. It's not like we go really nice around, you know, we hit them, we knock them down. This year we wanted to replace a lot of the existing split rail fence we had. It's $38,000 tab, you know, so we didn't do it. We only replaced a small amount of it.
Sure.
So.
And we could talk about different
And fences,
things.
are we keeping somebody out of something? What are we doing here? You know, are we corralling some horses or what, you know,
No, you're unifying the village.
I understand.
The whole fence,
I get it.
2 different kinds of fences, 3 different fences, primary, 4 different fences, primary streetscape fences. You've got chain link up by Crabtree, which is a really large section of streetscape fencing that affects the visitor and the resident. You have Crabtree's fencing itself. We have 2 rail at the railroad. We have 3 rail at the corner.
Yeah.
And, you know, we used to have the chain link along there, but then when you get west again, you get into the others, you know, John's chain link. So we have a lot of different, and the fence in this situation is being used the same as the sweeps, the same as the ground plane, and the same as is to unify that area in a rhythm that we can continue on the south entrance, north entrance, west entrance, and sort of develop this rhythm. Understanding your point entirely, the idea here would be that the fences are only in the unmowed islands.
So you're not mowing around the.
They're not in the
posts.
lawns. So using the lawn, ground plane, however you want to call it, and the break in the fence to help guide views and take advantage of them, it all works towards one end. Each is a small piece of the overall puzzle. Each has a level of effectiveness. One of the strongest is the fence. So we've already used it in many different areas.
Hopefully.
It's a recommendation from us.
They'll be positioned in a way that no weed whackers are needed.
That's exactly the point. That's the idea, is that it's within those islands. So you're mowing around the islands, and we'll show you,
Right.
it's better if we show you some imagery. Hang on, I'll get back
Well,
to
I get it.
that.
That's a time-intensive effort.
So if you've all been down Sheridan Road near Fort Sheridan Cemetery, this is just on the south side. And this was a rainy morning, so the images are kind of blurry, but do you see how against the road you get, most places has just a straight bone edge. But in this area, you see how it curves around, and it curves around here. If you imagine the fence being within this bed, you're mowing just around the curve. And so we're keeping this native look, and this fence can be kind of floating within it, so we're not weed whacking around the post. We totally understand that, but that's the intent of these, you know, kind of drifts.
We can burn
And you can
Larry will burn it. Larry will probably burn it.
It's charred.
Thanks, Larry. Left faster than we went.
I'm going to keep going, but we can certainly come back to this. So a couple of zoomed in views is, one is at the west side where the entry sign is. And we saw this as an opportunity to pick up on the native drifts of perennials and grasses to do something that's more ornamental just at where those entry signs are. So where you see this, you know, this is the entry sign. Again, here's the railroad, 176. Here's our right-of-way line. So within the right-of-way is where the gateway sign exists today. These purple massings in front of it and around it are in a linear fashion, so we don't just have this teeny tiny little blip around it, but it's something that really is substantial, so it feels like it's part of something greater. These we would see as being more highly ornamental. So something like you would see, well, this is a shot from Botanic Gardens, but you know, it's native or native-derived grasses and flowers, and these are all things that provide more color. And then it transitions quickly to the other items that we discussed.
And the idea there is that, you know, it doesn't mean you necessarily change plants, but you go from, say, 100 species, you sort of narrow down to a dozen as you get to the signs, and you go from this, you know, complete mix of a natural prairie into a more organized natural plants, you know, stuff right out of the prairie, but it reaches a higher level of organization where it reaches the signage. something we would recommend consistently throughout the village. A couple of these areas are very difficult to do that. So it's a use of natives. You can see on the right, we have the grasses in the background, and then all of a sudden in the foreground, you have this wonderful mix of a few different prairie flowers, but that sort of thing. The foreground being the sign, and then these big sweeps of the native grasses going up through. You know, we don't even know if those islands that we're talking about would be, maybe they're 100% native grasses, maybe they're 100 species. You know, that kind of things are the next step in this process. That, you know, we're not going there today with this, but the concept of that, you know, subtle manipulations to keep a unified presentation using fencing, ground plane, prairie grasses, prairie forbs is our links for the whole corridor, and you can pull it off. I mean, if you go back, would you switch back to that first picture of the open space in that corridor, the aerial picture?
That?
One more, I think it is.
This one?
That. Now, all you have to do is look at the central element of this. You know, from Chow up through the Park District, look at that giant band of green space. You know, Park District has 160 acres of green space there. The village has that, I think, 38-acre parcel. That square in the middle is where Chow staged construction from. But the opportunity for views and opening in this sort of entrance unification is huge, and it doesn't take a whole lot to get it. So it's really kind of exciting from that point of view. You don't have a lot to do to make this spectacular, unified, and just a really smooth, gentle entrance to the village. We can't do anything about the number one problem from my point of view, which is the wires and the transmission poles, but we can certainly make everything down below weave in and out, interconnect, and have a rhythm that we can use to define the entrances, like I said, in a few different areas of the village. This and the North Crabtree are really the most open and have the greatest opportunity. But heading north from, you know, where Sheridan and McKinley and split up there, you also have an opportunity. It's just narrower, but it's green on both sides. We have natural copses, we have islands, we have fences there now. We have open tree lawn. So that same rhythm and use of plants and use of planes, elevations, to carry that can happen there as well. Larry, I think you were at the meeting when we talked about this at the Park District Committee level, and you had talked about the school and open lands expanding that wetland area that was planted years ago. That sort of concept can be tied into this. There could be a layer between the buckthorn wall protecting the neighbors and the mowed lawn that's on the street, a weaving belt of edge prairie or savanna or something like that that would match what's on the other side. And all of a sudden we start getting a rhythm. And we're all aware of the fact that once a year that's a big parking lot, but we don't want to let that necessarily drive everything about this space.
Keep going. The next enlargement area is that intersection at Route 176 and Greenway Road, and so, you know, we're pretty tight with right-of-way. It's coming right up to the sidewalk or the bike path here. It's way down here in the hole. And the northeast corner, we don't have really much space to work with. There's a residence right here. But what we're looking to do is, you know, again, enhance the existing split rail fence that we know Public Works loves to maintain, and where it's possible to plant some, you know, additional drifts, you know, around them, maybe make maintenance a little bit easier, and where we have opportunity to let those drifts maybe hop across the sidewalk in a couple of spots. Again, these are low plantings, but we've got these curves, these openings, which would be lawn, and a crisp mow edge, so that you have this transition between the edge of the road and the edge of the grasses. Back here at the northwest quadrant here is where the Park District property and the savanna and the wetland exist. Already some really beautiful existing trees. And so, again, just enhancing that with the same sort of prairie, low prairie treatment that hops across the sidewalk where we can. This is a really key intersection. I mean, this is sort of 100% corner if you were to pick one in the corridor. This is an example on the right-hand side of a mown path with wildflowers. So again, you can see that that curved edge and what that looks like. And as far as establishing these things, typically to get them started, it's just a series of mowing stakes just to kind of figure out where the pattern is. Once those shapes are in there, then they become pretty easy to follow. But it's a matter of sticking to the mowing stakes just for the first couple of seasons.
Just curious, what sort of a budget would something like this be? I mean, a couple $100,000, $500,000 to actually accomplish this?
Well, we haven't put, the extent of our part of this, the consulting side of it, doesn't include the budgets and things like that, so we haven't actually put anything together yet, but that would be part of the next step. And again, looking at what we're doing, having had a lot of experience in this, it's probably the biggest bang for the buck you could possibly get, this corridor here, because most of the major pieces are already in place. The wetland you've been working on.
I completely agree that it is a significant thing. I'm just trying to wrap my head around what something like that costs.
Right,
yeah.
so we haven't done that yet.
Okay.
But along those lines, I mean, because Bill, we've had the same discussions internally, is that this is a long corridor. It's likely not something that, a village is going to hire a contractor and start doing this tomorrow. But what we might think about, and something that we can think about as a group, is, if we were to prioritize elements of this corridor, we knew we couldn't do it all at once, how maybe would we carve it up? What might be the first stage, Would it be, tackling the intersection and maybe just this little area around the sign? I know Ebola has already tackled pieces of this, and so would it be widening that or planting the areas that buckthorn has been removed just to test it? So, it's something that, we'd love your feedback on as to how we can maybe, recommend to the village to move forward with prioritization of the corridor.
Would you say it's like a 5-year project or a 10-year project?
Too early to tell at this point.
Depends on what you see.
I would, what we would, as part of the following steps, we would price this as a whole, that whole corridor, and then be able to break that down. I think the numbers are going to be surprisingly low for the effect that we're going to get out of this. The fence is probably going to be one of the, pricier items. You heard the $38,000, I think.
That's for 2-rail, not 3-rail.
Yeah. This would be 2-rail. It just depends on which one of the 5 we have to be decided.
So no change?
Not changing.
Won't change. We'll just put up, hog wire.
There we go.
Anyway, I'm really interested to find that out myself, because I'm really thinking that this could really, we do a lot of work in the winter, we get things set up, open lands, you've already been involved in a lot of it, but I would think, we would price this with no input from the public. I mean, from a point of view of expecting work from anybody, but then you can always jump in and do whatever. But I just am really pleased with the way I'm seeing it already finished in my head, and I just think getting there, this is one of the easiest pathways I've been out in the village entranceway. And the effect of this is so much stronger than most village entranceway that it's hard for me not to be jumping ahead and getting excited about it. But costs are the next line once we get tighter definition of things like we're talking about tonight. We can apply them to this, and then we start moving into the next level of drawings. These are conceptual. We can't price until we get more specific. If we're going to use borough, how many, what size, where, all of that has to be done before we can put numbers on it. But we can put, just like we've done here with conceptual drawings, we can put conceptual pricing on it too. But bid documents and getting the actual number is a whole different ballgame.
Is there some logic to just continue with the buckthorn ratification, get rid of it, and so we can really see what we have as far as the health of the trees and other plant material might be in there that the buckthorn is choked out?
The advantage to that, because maybe you do this as a public-private partnership or something like that, but the advantage to this, just what you said, when we did Forest Park, when we first started, the first thing we did there in the middle of the winter was clear all of the vistas. We did that with only cutting a couple native trees, and yet we cut hundreds of trees out. All of a sudden, resistance to the concept, tightness of the wallets in regards to monies being given, everything just ramped up. And all of a sudden, there was an excitement in the village that we didn't have before we did that. So just taking the buckthorn out of here is going to do that same thing. It's going to excite residents. It's going to start to show you these opportunities. I see all that, but I realize that a lot of people have to have it right in front of them. And cutting the buckthorn out now, continuing or doing any of that, except for in areas like behind the Park District main building where it's the receiving end, and we don't want the pool open to the intersection. That whole thing to the west of there can all be done now from our point of view. Where the islands end up, those kind of things, those can be determined afterwards. But all the scrub and junk, if we took it out now, I think it'd be a lot easier for people to see the potential that's here, which if we were looking at raising funds and stuff like that, that'd be a very good idea.
And that could be part of a whole marketing campaign. I mean,
Exactly.
we could make a flyer or a poster out of this and pair it with all the different man's efforts and removing of the buckthorn, get
So
people excited.
The first step is the buckthorn removal, is what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, you've already been doing the first step, right?
Yeah.
Well, I hasten to add that we were actually in the process of clearing the whole space for the whopping price tag of $15,000 when our efforts were stopped, essentially by this process. And I'm not, there's obviously benefit to the whole village by this process, but we were underway. And it was with volunteer work and with Lobola's summer interns.
Mm-hmm.
So I agree with Cliff that this needn't be clearing. It doesn't have to be something over $100,000 or anything like that.
Your 15,000, Mary, was it this central area, or how, can you give me, I'm just curious about pricing.
Well, actually, it was $30,000 because we were asking the Park District to chip in.
How much area were you approximately?
Everything from Green Bay to the water tower pond.
That whole north corridor, Larry, I'm glad you brought that up because there is a price. So there's a number we can use. 30,000 bill, like you said.
Well, 30,000 includes just a ton of volunteer work.
Well, I understand, but just
Yeah, that's on your
that's
different.
Some of us just,
that's
some of us need a life, and
And we're bringing the trucks and the loader, loading all the stuff out. It's not like we're burning it on site or anything.
What
so.
was cut, Lobola cut, and
the village here. But again, the average front yard on a professionally landscaped house in Lake Bluff is probably more like 25 to 50,000. So if you look at it compared to this entire corridor, that's what I'm talking about when I get excited about the fact, because so many times the numbers keep us from doing things. The only reason we have power lines ruining our view every time I turn east on 176 is because of money. We can bury those lines, but we won't spend the money to do it. So having something like this where money isn't going to be the big sledgehammer over our heads, where there's opportunities to get a lot done for a little, that's what excites me about the whole project, because you can put this whole thing together for less than the guy spent on the house I just did.
yeah, when you talk about excitement within the village, it was our strategy that excitement translate not just into people writing checks, but showing up on Saturday or Sunday mornings to cut up the barn and make brush piles, and that be a real community effort, but on the part of people who hadn't been outside in months or years. I had a separate question. We're focusing on buckthorn. Without opening a Pandora's box, should we open that definition to include honeysuckle or calorie pear or other things that are other woody, or should we just say other woody invasives? Because I don't want people just thinking television about buckthorn.
It's also, as soon as you get west of where you're working now, as you well know, it starts dropping out and being a nice upland wetland there with the scattered oaks and hickories down to a succession of scrub woodland. So everything down there, including on the ditch and in the entire wetland complex that isn't mowed by the park district, you know, that's all secondary successional scrub woodland. So the only benefit to a lot of those trees is that they are trees. So I would recommend that you would tag the trees to remain, which would be probably
7 or 8.
20% of what's there at most. You have a lot of, you know, slippery elm, you have ash, you have a lot of, you know, just junk.
Cottonwoods.
If we get that out of it, well, cottonwood's not necessarily a junk tree. It depends on whether it's a male or a female, and I don't want to be sexist about it, but a male is no problem. The female's a real pain in the neck. That's because the cotton only comes.
I just
from
wrote that
females.
down just
Well, you have to understand, in a lot of parks, we have gone into stands of cottonwood and waited till the cotton falls and tagged all the females and cut them out, so we had beautiful, mature, bone trees that look like oaks without any of the problem with cottonwoods, because the debris that everybody is so mad about only comes from the females. So that's why I had that comment. It wasn't sexist. It was the reality of growing cottonwoods. You know, I had 5 acres with 34 cottonwoods on it on the river, up on the Des Plaines River in Gurnee for years, and we cut out the females early on, and we got rid of a major problem. We will want to keep, you know, we use secondary successional scrub woodlands to turn them into savannas, turn them into other stuff. Larry, you're familiar with this. We may leave trees that we normally wouldn't, just to give us the bones of what the savanna-like settings will look like. Then we plant what we want to have, and as it grows up, the others come down. You know, we call that nurse trees. You know, they provide a little bit of shade, a little bit of windbreak, the mycorrhizal interconnections help the trees that are being planted. That doesn't mean we leave them all, we still cut a good portion of them. But then as our trees that we want go up, the trees we don't come down. But in the meantime, we use them to strengthen our model of what we're trying to accomplish here. It's more typical in a woodland restoration, but we use them in these as well.
Did you have a question?
Oh, my question earlier was answered.
Speaking, well, maybe this is a good segue to, I don't know how much we want to get into the details of the plant lists, but, or, you want to speak to the sections first?
Well, sure. This is looking west. This is a hard thing to show you, you know, in a drawing because the scale is so large and the plantings aren't necessarily. But the idea, as you can see here, is there's the fences. They're restricted to the areas that are not mowed. There's grass. You see the gravel strips on the side of the road. And then this much more open view, again, picking the significant trees, trees of good form, trees of the right genus, and using those to help us create this bone, this backbone for this whole corridor. Because trees are an integral element of this corridor, and we'll use them to our advantage. But this shows you how that meandering, curving line, the lawn, which is sort of the dotted area, moves throughout. And the fence, as you can see here, is a real unifier through this whole process. Each piece of the puzzle works to strengthen the overall.
I've got a question.
So is the grass between the trees a lawn type of grass or a native prairie grass?
Well, that depends. It's the height that we're looking at. If the prairie, if the areas that the fences are in are prairie, say like it's on the bike path already, then those areas that are open and along the roads won't be in this style. They will be something different. They might be a short grass version of it. They might not even be a grass. They may be something that's easier to manage as a low profile because, you know, in our soils, it's very difficult to maintain a low native community if it's open. Woods is a whole different ballgame. So it depends. It depends on how we go about doing it. I mean, we do have to have mowed areas on the side of the road, mowed areas on the side of the bike path and things like that. So the idea is just green at a different level.
And I think if you were in a car going 35, 40 miles an hour, it's going to probably look like lawn, but what I'm hearing is that there's a desire for it not to be just your typical Kentucky rye, that there would be something else that would be more native. But yeah,
well, and it also needs to be different. It needs to have a different texture, a different look to it. So it may be something totally different that's native. than even the grass. It may be, like I said, it may be a shrub.
Maybe sedge.
Sedge, yeah.
Well, sedge is what comes to mind right off the bat.
That'd be great.
But it's a very difficult thing to maintain a massive sedge in this kind of situation because of the competition. You know, drop seed would be a good one for that area.
What about salt?
Well, that's part of it. I mean, that's part of the reason to have these. You notice that everything's held back from the roadsides. You have the gravel, then you have this mowed area that's there, then you have the plantings. Part of this, by the way, you know, years ago, as you know, when we went through the big fight over the tunnel for the bike path under the road, under Green Bay Road, and that whole corridor was done, which was seeded to a prairie mix that we actually specified, but then other seeds were added to it.
Mm-hmm.
But as part of that, it was determined they mowed this really wide strip, which made no sense to us. But that would again be an area where it's 100% the prairie style of plantings, and a large piece of it that would connect directly all the way down to Mariani, but only as you got to the street would these start to develop. So these don't exist on the other side of the fence on the south side, other side of the path on the south side, except for when you get to private land like Jawa, where the idea is to view through, which is what you used to be able to do.
This, yeah.
Like the area we were just talking about for the tunnel. That area is very hard to plant. So I've tried to plant trees in there. There are slabs of concrete that are 10, 12, 14 feet long in there.
It's called a moonscape. That's what we call it for mowing. The mowing you mow moonscape and butterfly meadow. Moonscape is obviously one side of the
Well, you know, it's a lot easier.
Butterfly meadow is another side of the street.
It's a lot easier to
Those are the
have
nicknames for it.
forest. But we can grow trees on it.
Some of the trees Bob and I planted when we first started working here are about the same size as they were. Because there's just nothing for them to grow, and it's all clay, it's asphalt, it's concrete. Actually, we have some old pictures of it where you'd be like, it looks like they dug up a highway, dumped it there, and then did something else somewhere. You know, it's a tough area to plant. I think that's what we're just,
But I mean, if
you know,
you
pointing
look at
out.
the end of the Bluff is Prospect, where a ravine where it runs to the very end, you know, that was the tollway dump down that hill all the way out of the lake, and there's trees coming out all over. So it has to be really, it has to have a chemical or something in it that will prevent the growth for us not to be able to grow trees. This is where cottonwoods become a huge player, because they will, silver maple, some of these trees that we normally would plant.
Black locust.
Well, you know, a lot of different things. In my opinion, having watched this from day one, the wrong trees were selected originally, it's long before you, wrong trees were selected, improper care was provided, and if you don't do everything right for the first 2 to 3 years in a situation like this, you will never have success. And that's what you're looking at. You're looking at failure of long-term maintenance of those plants, all based on the original plantings. I've done this so many times on so many soils. We can plant in a parking lot and grow a tree. And we can grow trees there, but we've got to take care of them while they're getting established. The first 3 years, I cannot stress enough. Plus, smaller trees, little stuff.
And
let
it's
it grow.
incredibly dry.
The less stress. As you get into these stressful sites, you really need to go smaller and smaller and smaller, because these trees need time. You know, we just redid the South Beach Access Road at the park, and Lake Forest going down to the beach, which is the landscape plan is for forest. But it's unweathered glacial till that was exposed, and it's planted into prairie, and the plan to plant it to forest is 10 years from now. So some of this may be way down the road, but the idea is stewards of our land, that we need to think way down the road. And so I know we can get trees to grow in there, but I also know exactly what you're talking about, because I saw it.
Yeah.
I was here when they built the tunnel. And, but there are pockets, or we wouldn't have the herbaceous growth we have, and there are some nice trees scattered in there that were more tolerant of the conditions and receive better care. So I agree with you. That's a huge part of the vision that we want to take and bring back to us. This is sort of a cross-section of that. You got the car, you got the road, that little swale on the side of the road, the mowed grass. Here we have the fence with the wildflower mass and trees within it. On the left, you also have the wildflowers and grasses. We have some distance off the path as per the county's request. And then you kind of fade into whatever it is. The left side of that picture where it's sort of the vignette fades out, that's people's properties, that's other areas that we can't control or people that don't want to participate. But once we get past that area and into the easements and right-of-ways, because there's so much of this, especially on that south end of 176. So that's the overall look from the side, cutting the cross section, the idea of it. So that's just to give you an elevation.
And then to the point earlier, if you were in the car, you're looking straight across, you get this view right across underneath the canopies, but above the prairie. And here's, like Cliff said, 2-foot offset, keep things kind of neat and tidy up against the edges. So these were the characteristics that we identified before, and Cliff has provided some specific plantings for each type as we're thinking about what kinds of plants go in there. I'm sure you want to read all of these.
No, I'm not going to read them at all, but I want to show you on the right that big red oak. This is in front of Shore Acres most likely. That's mature forest that was cut open, and you can see. But what I want to show you here is, see that banding in front of it with the golden yellow plant, whatever that may be? That sort of bordering definition is useful in our plans for other areas. It creates a unification and a transition between the forest. The forest along that corridor looks kind of weird when we first cut it because all you had was a towering timber and you didn't have anything under it. But now it's filling in with all this other stuff over time. It's a beautiful forest remnant. I wish there was more.
And so I think the other thing to point out with these plant lists is that there are these layers, so you'll see that they're organized that, there's trees, so your canopy is defined, the shrubs, and then the herbaceous layer is that oak layer I just mentioned.
And forest obviously has hundreds of other plants that can be used in it. These are given as sort of a guideline and sort of primary elements of that. But there are other trees, shrubs, and herbaceous material, especially herbaceous material, far more than we're listing.
For sure. Well, gosh, how many varieties of sedge are there?
Right.
As far as scrub woodland goes, we're not recommending adding scrub woodland. We're just recognizing that it's a pattern, but that it, would likely need to be removed. It's part of what we're recommending.
And if we can't remove it, like in this instance where the entire thing is scrub woodland, we could still create islands and then later on go in and clean them out. So you could even phase to that level, where you follow the patterns, the fence goes in, the patterns are created, but we don't replant everything. We don't do all this work. We just get one of the planes going. In this case, that would be the ground plane. And then we look at other unifiers like the fence. Or lack of, depending on how it pans out. That's the wetland up on the corner, and that's the look. And that would weave with breaks to help direct and define view sheds and create connections to the golf course throughout all the way down to the river. That would be the idea. Long term, love to see that river area cleared and turned into a wonderful open wetland community and tie into some of the park district lands.
I really want my long-range plan is to be able to see down that river eighth of a mile or something.
Well, they'll come in and open it up one of these days. They did everything south, and you can see all of it more than people want to. But in Lake Forest, that area like you go over to where the compost center is and stuff, and they took every single tree that exists in those corridors out.
Yeah.
So I don't know why they haven't come up here yet, but they will.
Someday.
There was a lot of lawsuits, a lot of battling, a lot of fighting south of here because it went through open lands and a lot of private property all the way down to, Wesley Road rolled down. But it's going to come up here, and that could be a time when we join in with the contractors, Holmer, and those other guys who do that large clearing, and maybe we do get a big chunk of that reverted into. And it would be nice to connect that all the way to the pond in front of Public Works.